So today we'll take a look at Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 1, Text 7. Sattvam rajastama iti prakṛtiḥ guṇa natesham yugapadrajan rasa ullasa eva va. Sattvam rajastama iti prakṛtiḥ guṇa natesham yugapadrajan rasa ullasa eva va. Sattvam rajastama iti prakṛtiḥ guṇa natesham yugapadrajan rasa ullasa eva va. Others, please. Word to word, sattvam, the mode of goodness; raja, the mode of passion; tama, the mode of ignorance; iti, thus; prakrti, of material nature; na, not; atmana, of the spirit soul; guṇa, qualities; na, not; tesham, of them; yugapat, simultaneously; rajan, O king; rasa, diminution; ullasa, prominence; eva, certainly; va, or. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. My dear King Parikshit, the material qualities, sattva guna, rajoguna, and tamoguna, all belong to the material world and do not even touch the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These three gunas cannot act by increasing or decreasing simultaneously. Responsively, please. My dear King Parikshit, the material qualities, sattva-guna, rajoguna, and tamoguna, all belong to the material world and do not even touch the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These three gunas cannot act by increasing or decreasing simultaneously. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The original position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is one of equality. There's no question of his being influenced by sattva guna, rajoguna, or tamoguna. For these material qualities cannot touch the Supreme Lord. It is therefore, the Lord is therefore called the Supreme Īśvaraḥ. Īśvaraḥ paramaḥ kṛṣṇaḥ. He is the Supreme Controller. He controls the material qualities. Daivī guṇa-mayī māyā. Mayādhyakṣena prakṛti sūyate. Material nature, prakṛti, works under his order. How then can he be under the qualities of prakṛti? Krishna is never influenced by the material qualities. Therefore, there's no question of partiality in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Om ajnanatimidandhasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshurun militam jena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukhaṁ karoti vāchalam pangum langhayate girim jatkripatamahang bande Shri Gurun dinataranam. Shri Chaitanya manobhishtam sthapitam yena bhutale svayam rupakadamahyam dadati svapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Chapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Sattvam tat rajastama iti prakṛtir-natmano gunaha natesham yugapadrajan rasa ullasa eva va. My dear King Parikshit, the material qualities, sattva guna, rajoguna, and tamoguna, all belong to the material world and do not even touch the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These three gunas cannot act by increasing or decreasing simultaneously. So I thought we'd just get a little context by reviewing some of these verses. So we see King Parikshit, having heard previously how frequently the Supreme Lord seems to take the side of the suras when there's a conflict with the asuras. And seems to interfere sometimes, right? So a question arises in his mind. It seems that the Lord's partial. I'm not quite sure how that works. He asks, what benefit could he derive from siding with the demigods? What interest would he fulfill in this way? Since the Lord's transcendental, why should he fear the asuras, and how could he be envious of them? Greatly fortunate and learned Brahmana, whether Narayana is partial or impartial has become a subject of great doubt. Kindly dispel my doubt with positive evidence that Narayana is always neutral and equal to everyone. And Shukadeva congratulates him for his questions, offers his obeisances to Srila Vyasadeva, his father and spiritual master, before beginning his answer, and says the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, is always transcendental to the material qualities, and therefore he's called nirguna, or without qualities. Some people misunderstand nirguna means without qualities of any kind. But and this is difficult, perhaps, for those of us who are conditioned by the three modes of material nature, who are conditioned by our countless lifetimes of habitual interaction with those three modes, for us to understand that there can be qualities that are beyond what we actually experience. The point he's going to make here is that these qualities, these are all, that our responses to the material world are determined by the different qualities of material nature under which we behave, under whose influence we behave. But he's making the point that the Lord is absolutely aloof from all this. We'll see in today's verse we see in today's verse, he just says, he's the Supreme Lord. The qualities are under his control. Srila Prabhupada cites a couple of verses from the Bhagavad Gita. This is a theme in the Bhagavad Gita. I'm the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and there isn't anything that touches me. And we'll take a look at some verses that deal with this in the Gita in a minute. But this is a really important point to understand. Krishna is not affected. The modes of material nature are an expression of one of his energies. The inferior of his three broad categories of energies, the Antaranga Shakti, the Tatastha Shakti, and the Bahiranga Shakti. I mean, this is dead matter, essentially. Although I saw a meme on Facebook the other day that I rather liked that says, and I don't remember who said it. It wasn't a name that I recognized or cared about. But it was the sentiment that really appealed to me. It said, the world only pretends to be made of matter. Secretly, it's made of love. And this is something this is a completely different topic. We learn in the second canto, one of the things we learn in the main thing we learn in the second canto is that everything, in a sense, is Krishna. Because everything consists of one or another of his energies, and his energies are non-different from him. So this idea of achintya bheda bheda tattva is presented very powerfully in the second canto. And there's a chapter called Purusha Sukta Confirmed, which shows us that this idea of achintya, although Jiva Goswami might have coined the phrase, the idea, that's not Jiva Goswami's idea. It's not even Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's idea. Mahaprabhu gets it from the Bhagavatam. But it's not even originally an idea we find in the Bhagavatam. It comes from the Purusha Sukta prayers, which are part of the Rig Veda, which is the oldest of the four Vedas. This is the oldest idea in the world. We just don't know it. We don't know how to understand it. We don't know how to reconcile, that this material world, this is also one of Krishna's energies. So we're presented, for people who are very materially conditioned, we're presented with a universal form of the Lord in that chapter, whereby we can see at least one way in which the entire material world is Krishna. The mountains are his bones, and the forests are the hairs on his body, the sun and the moon are his eyes, etc. This is one way a rudimentary way to understand how Krishna pervades everything. So this idea, achintya bheda bheda tattva, that Krishna is at the same time both transcendent and immanent, is something that we, in order to understand the Bhagavatam, we first need to be grounded in this idea. So, we see that. So, and we see here that, Parikh is bewildered by this whole business of the Lord's apparent partiality to the devatas, to the demigods, the suras. And so, Shukadev Goswami is pointing out that actually that's not the way it is. This kind of discrimination, the kind of discrimination that you have in mind, that's due to the influence of the modes of material nature. and the conditioning that we received by operating under their influence for more lifetimes than we can imagine, much less count. And the Lord is absolutely aloof from that, while at the same time he has some interest in especially in the lives of devotees. And as we'll see, this is a very interesting chapter. It's called "The Supreme Lord is Equal to Everyone." And this is exactly the point that's being made by this. And this is our introduction to the Nrsimha Leela. I think it's the longest Leela presented in the Bhagavatam in terms of number of chapters. It covers 10 chapters, Nrsimha Leela. And interestingly, in the Bhagavatam, the star of the show, the cynosure of everyone's attention, the focus of everyone's attention throughout this section of the Bhagavatam is not so much the Lord himself as his devotee. Because the Bhagavatam is, as much as anything else, it's a chronicle of the Lord's interactions with his devotees. So we see that there is an appearance of partiality. So, and then next, Shukadeva is going to give, this is how he sets up the Nrsimha Leela, because Parikshit asks, well, how is it, I personally, he tells about a conversation between Narad Muni and King Yudhishthira to illustrate just how the Lord is completely impartial. And this kind of leads us into the pastime of Lord Nrsimhadev. And Yudhishthira is, feeling, he's expressing a similar bewilderment. He says, how is it that, I personally witnessed Shishupal merge into the body of the Lord in the Rajasuya sacrifice. This guy's a demon. He's like made up of envy of the Lord. That's what he seemed to be constituted of. And yet, he got something that even the greatest transcendentalists can't attain. This sayujya mukti, this merging into the body of the Lord. And Dantavakra too, he merged. What is the deal here? These guys are demons. And so King Parikshit points out by saying, well, one thing you have to understand is this is all a setup. And we see this when we go back to the third canto, when we see the setup for Lord Varaha's interaction with Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu's brother, these two darling sons of Diti. And so he says, one thing you need to understand is that these two fellows, these two cousins of yours, Dantavakra and Shishupal, they used to live in Vaikuntha Loka as personal associates of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Yudhishthira says, what? I'm sorry. That's not possible, because their very bodies are constituted of spiritual substance. How is it possible that they could fall down into the material world? The same thing comes up in the third canto when the Kumaras, after they've cursed Jaya and Vijaya for being a little rude to them, and then they see that the Lord is going to actually follow through on their curse. He's going to make it happen. He just gives them a choice. And kind of a choice, we'll see, as we'll see. And all of a sudden, and you think the Kumars are thinking, whoa, wait a minute. These guys are pure devotees, and because they were a little rude to us, they have to go to the material world for whatever it is, three lifetimes as demons? They were just a little rude to us, and we're not even devotees. What's our fate? Because we actually offended pure devotees. And the Lord understanding their concern, assures them, don't worry about it. This never happens. This is a special setup. These two intimate servants of mine understand that sometimes, Brigapati Prabhu in LA brought this up yesterday, that the Lord likes to express his Vira Rasa. This Supreme Personality of Godhead, not only does he have transcendental qualities, but he has transcendental desires. And he has a transcendental desire to mix it up sometimes. Now, nobody in Vaikuntha Loka is going to engage in fighting with the Lord, because everyone there is so full of awe and reverence that there's no question of that. But Jaya and Vijay understood that this was a part of the Lord's heart, that he also has this desire. And so they wanted to satisfy his desire to have someone to mix it up with. So they, air quotes here, made this mistake. So the Lord is explaining to the Kumars, in order to satisfy their desire, to satisfy my desire to express this Vira Rasa, this heroic, chivalrous mood, I've set this all up, so you don't have to worry about it. So the point is that, the Lord seems to be responding inimically to, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, but he's really just responding with them according to the way they approach him. So the Lord tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, by explaining this to Arjuna, in the 4th canto, he says, Ye yata mam prapadyante tangs tataiva bhajamyaham. Mama vartmanu vartante manushya parta sarvashaha. It's according to how this word yata, Prabhupada gives it as, which is one of the translations you'll find in Monier Williams's Sanskrit English dictionary. But another translation is, in which manner or way. So according to our approach to the Lord, he responds accordingly. This is natural. This is just natural. We do the same thing. We respond to people according to the way. If someone approaches us with great affection and we can feel that it's authentic, that it's genuine, that it's not motivated by something, that it's not transactional, then gradually trust between the two of us will grow, and we'll give our hearts to them. We'd take a bullet for them. Or as Srila Prabhupada said when he noticed one of his godbrothers feeling a little uneasy that Srila Prabhupada was being attended to by a young American woman. Prabhupada stopped, and he understood that his godbrother's concern and he said, okay, so you see that girl over there? Yes, she cooks for me. But I will tell you this, she would cut her throat for me, and I would cut mine for her. So when there's that kind of trust, that's just natural. That kind of partiality is natural. What appears to be partiality in the Lord is actually partiality to his devotees, but it's actually his being subdued by their bhakti. There's a verse that Srila Jiva Goswami mentions in his Priti Sandarbha, and the source he gives is just called Mathura Shruti, and I haven't been able to actually nail this down yet. But because it's referred to as the Mathura Shruti, seems to imply that it's from the Vedas. And the verse says that bhakti alone can draw us near to Krishna. Bhakti alone can show us Krishna. Bhakti alone can control Krishna. Therefore, bhakti is the most powerful thing of all. So he's just naturally responding to the love of the devotees, just as he says in the 9th chapter of the Gita. If you make even a simple offering, something as simple and humble as a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or some water, if you offer it with love, I accept that. Because he doesn't need the leaf, the flower, the fruit, the water, the chocolate cake, or whatever it is. What he's lacking, what do they say? What do you give the guy who has everything? What's he missing? What he's missing is my heart. What he's missing is my love. So the best thing I can give him is that. And that's what he responds to. He's called in Chaitanya Bhagavat Bhavagrahi Janardana. That he accepts the devotee's intention, the devotee's affection. So Krishna says to Arjuna that according to the manner of our approach to him and the intensity of our approach to him, he responds accordingly. So these folks approached him inimically. Shishupal, Dantavakra, Hiranyaksha, Hiranyakashipu, Ravana, and Kumbhakarna, they approached him with enmity. And so he responds like that. But it's a play. It's a lila. And this is him actually exchanging love with his pure devotees as well. So I thought we'd take a quick look at the context of this verse, Ye yata mam prapadyante, because he goes on to make a point very close to what we see. So in the 9th verse he says, Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo veti tatvataha tyaktva deham punar janma naiti mamiti shorjuna. If someone actually understands the transcendental nature of his appearance and activities, they don't have to take birth in this world again, but they go to him. And then he says, a lot of people have been able to do this. Vitaraga bhaya krota māyā mamupashrita. Many, many people, by taking shelter of me in the past, have actually been able to attain pure love for me. And then he says, and I respond according to the manner of your approach, of your surrender. And then he says, men in this world desire success and fruit of activities, and therefore they worship the demigods. Quickly, of course, they get results from fruit of work in this world. And quickly, they lose those results, right? He tells us later, when that pious credit runs out, then you can even attain svarga. But that's a temporary situation. And then he says, according to the 3 modes of material nature and the work ascribed to them, the 4 divisions of human society were created by me. So this varnashrama system, this is what people need, what they deserve. And yes, this is my creation. But then he says, and yet, although I'm the creator of the system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. I don't have anything to do with it. I created it indirectly through one of my energies, but it doesn't really have anything to do with me. We hear in the Bhagavatam that even varnashram dharma, which is intended for the upliftment of humankind, if it doesn't awaken a taste for hearing the topics of the Lord, it's nothing more than a waste of time. And then there's a problem. In order to get the results, you have to do everything perfectly, and the results are temporary. Ashashvatam, right? Kshine punya martya lokam vishanti. And then in the next verse he says, there is no work that affects me, nor do I aspire for the fruits of action. One who understands this truth about me also does not become entangled in the fruit of reactions of work. In other words, if we actually understand this, we can become free as well. This is the state, this is liberation. So, the Lord's making this point here that, or Shukadeva Goswami is making the point in today's verse that the Lord really is neutral. You have to understand the kind of, this partiality and enmity that you're thinking of is a result of the modes of passion and ignorance. And those things, they can't even touch the Lord. He's so aloof. He does this through his energies. But personally, he's completely unaffected by these things. Because he's the supreme controller. Īśvaraḥ paramaḥ Krishna. He's the supreme controller. The material nature, Mayādhyakṣena, prakṛti, sūyate, sacchara, it's under his control. So how could it possibly control him? The only thing that can control him is love, and that's what's going on when we see that he's responding to the devotee's dependence. So the suras, they're materialistic, but they have some inclination for respecting and worshiping the Lord, even if it might be a little transactional. Prabhupada would sometimes say, whenever we take one step toward the Lord, he'll take 10 toward us. He's very generous. And this apparent partiality toward devotees is perfectly natural. It's not a flaw in the Lord's character. Rather, that bhakta-vatsalya is natural. It's an ornament. It's seen as an ornament. It makes the Lord even more beautiful. We see that on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where, in order to satisfy Bhishma's desire, the Lord breaks his promise to not participate and takes up a weapon against Bhishma Dev when he attacks Arjuna. This is an exchange of love, not enmity. The Lord felt Bhishma's arrows like love bites when they struck his body. So this is a whole. I heard something that really nice the other day at Vyasa Puja festival for Giriraj Swami. One of his devotees had cited Giriraj Swami as saying that this whole business, Bhakti Yoga, Krishna consciousness, is love masquerading as philosophy. And that's at the heart of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's actually at the heart of the Gita, right? We see that at the very end, Krishna tells at the beginning of the 9th chapter, he tells, I'm going to tell you something so confidential it'll blow your mind. Nobody can get this. Nobody's heard this before. Buckle up. And he builds through the chapter. And he even gets to the point where he says, even if someone, if their real intention is simply to attain me, simply to serve me, they can completely mess up in the worst possible ways. And still, you have to consider him saintly. Why? Because of his bhakti. The bhakti will correct it, he tells him in the next. He's rightly situated. Bhakti is so powerful that it will cleanse any of those impurities that might be remaining. And he builds and builds, and then he finally just says, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskar. Right there, smack in the middle of the Gita. Just love me. And then he says it again at the end of the 18th chapter. And he builds up, he says, buckle up. Because we've talked about some very, very confidential things. And now I'm going to tell you the biggest secret. So pay attention. This is for your benefit. You pay close attention. Just love me. And how do we express that? By giving everything else up, completely giving everything else up. And then we see in the next step is there at the beginning of the Bhagavatam. He says, at the end of the Gita, he says, Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam braja. Completely reject, parityaja, not just tyaja, but parityaja, completely reject all conventional senses of dharma. And take shelter in me exclusively. And even if there's some fault incurred by your doing so, I've got you covered. Moksha ishami, he says, I'll deliver you from those problems. Ma shuchaha. Don't worry your pretty little head. And at the beginning of the Bhagavatam, we see the same, we see just the next step. Dharma prodhita kaitavatra paramo nirmatsaranam satam. We see this, now we have a literature for those who have already praudhita. Different words, same sense. Completely rejected, not just sarva dharma, but it's characterized in a very heavy way as kaitava dharma, cheating religion. Anything that's at all selfishly motivated. For those who've completely rejected that, and therefore whose hearts are completely pure because there's no envy, they don't have a personal agenda, now we've got something to talk about. And that's the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it builds up to Krishna's smiling face in the 10th canto, which is just exchanges of love between Krishna and his devotees, different kinds of devotees. I've managed to go over despite my determination to stop and leave time for questions. But if there are any comments or questions, then we can welcome them now.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, Maharaj, for a wonderful lecture. I'd like to ask for you advice. You mentioned in class about the love will awaken if we don't have a transactional approach to someone. But sometimes, practically speaking, we, for instance, on book distribution, we might be in a moment, we're speaking to a lot of people, and we might kind of have a very short interaction with somebody, and it might seem to a person that we're expecting something for these books, for instance. Or another example, if we are engaging somebody in service, you could also come out like that, that we are trying to get something done, and we're asking for help of another person. So I'd like to know what would you recommend in this, how to have less of this expectations.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. We are who we are and we are where we are. And the people with whom we interact are also who they are and where they are. So even if sometimes, even if we don't have an expectation in our approach, because when we're distributing books, we call it preaching, not my favorite word for it, but it's the word that Srila Prabhupada used quite consistently. What we're really doing is sharing what we have. We're sharing whatever shraddha we have, whatever faith we have. And to the extent that we can get to that place, where we can actually get out of our heads and into our hearts, people who, with similarly open hearts, will respond accordingly. They'll feel that. And so that makes the interaction even sweeter. I had there was it must have been the early 80s. My godbrother Praghosha, who's one of the famous big book distributors from the old days, from O'Hare Airport with Ashram Swami and a bunch of others. Praghosha was, at the time, he was still a brahmachari, still distributing books. Was giving a class, and there was this devotee who was in and out of the temple. He was attached to the devotee who was the temple president, personally attached to the devotee who was the temple president at the time. So he'd come and hang out, stay at the temple for as long as he could, and then he'd go out and he'd make a living doing telemarketing or something like that. So this is like kind of a salesperson by nature. So he asked Praghosha, could you share with us the kind of typical interaction with the typical airport mark? And Praghosha got this blank look on his face. Like the guy was speaking Swahili or something, you know, it's like, what? So this gentleman, Glenn, repeated his question. And then the blank look left Praghosha's face, and he looked at him and he said, here's the thing. If you see them as marks, there's never going to be a personal connection, because they'll feel that. But if you see them as lost godbrothers or godsisters, that's going to be a completely different kind of interaction. If you see them as family, or if you see that spiritual spark, you see them as consciousness, this just the same as me, accompanied by the Paramatma, just the same as me. And as Chanakya Pandit says, he says, Matrivat paradareshu paradravyani loshtavat atmavat sarvabhuteshu yapashyati sapantita. He says, a wise person sees like this. Matrivat paradareshu. Any woman other than my own wife, it's like mother, untouchable, right? Not for me to enjoy. And other people's stuff, like garbage in the street, not for me to enjoy. Don't identify with any woman other than your wife. Don't identify with other people's stuff, but do identify with their suffering and enjoyment. Understand that it's just the same as ours. Atmavat sarvabhutisha, that everyone else's experience is the same as ours. And if we see that, this is a person who's suffering in the material world just like me, I feel, at least to some extent, like I have something that can help. And let me see who's ready for that. Because the preaching is most effectively done by those in the Madhyama Adhikar, those Madhyama Bhagavats. And they're able to discriminate between who's innocent and who's inimical. Who's devoted, who's innocent, who's God, who's devoted, and who's inimical. That kind of discrimination is welcome in order to share the Lord's blessings. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that such people become agents of the Lord's Kripa Shakti. They become agents of His mercy-giving potency. And Bhakti Devi acts through them. Although she is every bit as independent as the Lord, she can go wherever she likes. The way she chooses to behave is, having taken shelter in those devotees' hearts, wherever they show their mercy, she follows. So when Dvijamani approaches someone and he's situated in his heart, he sees, oh, this person, their suffering's just like mine. What can I do to help? And he listens, he hears, he feels their heart. We get close enough to someone, we can actually feel the electromagnetic field generated by their heart, because it's a much more powerful organ of cognition in many ways than the brain. Its electromagnetic field is many dozens of times stronger than that of the brain. We get in between, somewhere 6 to 8 feet away from someone, we can actually feel their hearts if our heart's open, and then we can find a way to actually connect with them, where they'll appreciate whatever words we're able to come up with. They'll become bhavagrahi. They'll respond to our intention, which is just to share. Does that help? Yeah. It doesn't help me when I go. I mean, I'm just all self-conscious when I go out. My big day was $10 back in sometime in the early 70s. Any other comments or questions?
Thank you. It was really wonderful hearing you in the kitchen. And I had a question about the translation, but what you're talking about the heart, I actually had an experience of that. I had a roommate who was like a big Buddha type. He was always tranquil, and you could come to him with all your problems, and he would just kind of hear you and extend love to you. I remember I was walking with my brother one time, and I was trying to share his nature, and he goes, yeah, he just makes you feel all warm inside. Huh. I was thinking, when you're in his radius, you can actually feel that. So that's interesting that that's coming from the heart, and it's more dynamic than the brain, which Keshava Swami just told us was a drunken monkey bitten by a scorpion chased by a ghost. So it's good that our hearts have something natural and connective, that can nourish us, as opposed to the tricky brain. Would you please read the last sentence of the translation?
Oh.
It said that they don't...
Oh, I think we're out of time.
Oh.
This was my big fear. The 3 gunas cannot act by increasing or decreasing simultaneously.
So does one predominate the other in that one? If one increases, there's a decrease in the other 2, and one's always predominant?
Yeah, I think it's. I think it. When I was thinking about it this morning, they're limited. They have limitations, so they can't do both things simultaneously. But the Lord, because that's part of the way the material nature works. But the Lord can, simultaneously be aloof, be immanent and transcendent, be aloof and be involved in our lives. I was just speaking with a devotee when I was in Dallas a few days ago. We were recalling different times in our lives when it seems like the Lord is definitely moving us. And for me, it even precedes my having met devotees. I mean, it goes back even before Srila Prabhupada. No, not before Srila Prabhupada came, but I mean, I could kind of see it, in the what brought me to the point where I could meet devotees. Things happened that I would rather didn't happen. I would have preferred it that if they hadn't happened, but they did, and I found myself right where I needed to be, right when I needed to be there, and then even later in my life, moving me out of household life, situations occurred that I would have preferred had been otherwise, but it's brought me here in your company, brought me back here in your company. So that's the most sense I could make of it. But if Vijay Prabhu or Dravida Prabhu have further insights, I'd welcome those.
I'm thinking of that verse. I think it's in 14th chapter, where Krishna says, well, sometimes the mode of goodness predominates, sometimes the mode of passion. It's kind of like light and dark. The light and dark is not going to increase at the same time, is it?
Right.
One is going to increase, the other decrease. So that's how it is with the modes of nature.
Yeah, it's like the moon is either waxing or waning, right? We're either in the Krishna Paksha or the Gaura Paksha. And then we've got days like yesterday where there's that transition.
I was also wondering about that last sentence, but and I also thought that the most sense I could make was what I guess what you said made sense, but because it uses the word or, I'm wondering if that, to make any sense whatsoever, if that would have to be and, because if it's or, then how can something increase simultaneously, like increase or decrease, but simultaneously? There needs to be two things going on to be simultaneous. You can't just have something increase simultaneously. Simultaneously with what? But, or am I wrong? It says these three, okay, I see. So these three gunas, so there's multiple gunas simultaneously increasing or decreasing. Okay, so that makes sense. That seems compatible with what.
In the 11th canto, I think it's in the Uddhava Gita, there's a discussion wherein it's mentioned that the three modes of nature are constantly fighting each other and trying to dominate each other. So that seems relevant here.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the point from the Gita.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood that. Yep.
Yeah, they're always kind of jockeying for position. Thank you. Thank you for forcing me to confront that. I was dodging it. I read the sentence and I was actually, as I was reading the sentence, even both the first and the second time, I just thought, I hope nobody actually notices that sentence. We are out of time, though, because Krishna is waiting for us in another form as well. Grantha-raja Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha.